Hello and welcome back to another video. Today here again on the brand new Forza Motorsport game, this time for some GT car races in featured multiplayer. So last week I raced through all 5 touring car races in featured multiplayer, so today I thought I would try to race my way through all 5 of the slightly longer GT car races that are currently in featured multiplayer. This time starting with a safety rating of A and a skill level of 4,756, which is interesting because that seems to have dropped since the end of last week's video, despite me not playing all that much featured multiplayer between then and now. These things seem to keep changing themselves for not much reason at all. Anyway, it'll be interesting to see if that's improved at all by the end of today's races. Starting with our first race at Suzuka, and opting for the Porsche GT3. As with the touring cars in the video last week, I'm trying to use a variety of vehicles for these races, so we'll try not to use the same car twice. Qualifying was in the rain, and I managed to set a time of 2:17.1, which gave me a decent grid spot of 4th. The race was also in the wet, where I kept with the leaders, the Audi and the 2 Porsches, through the first twisty section, but then started to battle with the other 2 Porsches, and that Audi in the lead pulled away a bit pretty quickly at this point. The Porsche in front of me was very early on the brakes into the hairpin, so I kind of went to the inside probably a little bit too late, because the R8 behind me had the same idea, and had pulled out at the same time as me, and we had kind of just, lack of communication between the 2 of us, had ended in contact into there, which sent me into the other Porsche and allowed a Ford GT right up into the spot behind me. The 2 cars ahead were then weaving a bit down the back straight, not quite sure about the defence of the Porsche at the front there, and managed to both go wide into 130R, which gave me a run to the outside, but I then was squeezed a little bit too much out wide, putting a wheel on the grass, so I backed out of it a bit, and they both went back through. But then coming out onto the straight, I got this ever so tiny tap onto the rear of the car in front. I just carried a bit more speed than them, gave them a little tap, but that bumped them into the car in front, which then unsettled their car, and he started to go round, and then there wasn't really anywhere for me to go other than to bump the back of them slightly, which of course sent their car all the way round, unfortunately, resulting in what I thought was kind of an unfair for me 2.25 second penalty, but given I caused the contact that put them round, I suppose that's how Forza's system works, unfortunately. So yeah, it doesn't take into account that other things happened beforehand and there was nowhere to go. But anyway, that probably decreased my safety rating as well, which is a bit of a shame. This then allowed the Ford GT to catch up to the 2 remaining Porsches, myself and the other one, but he was just sort of there in the background for now. I was clearly faster than the other Porsche and went to the inside at the hairpin, but they kind of turned in and unsettled my car. I don't think on purpose, I don't think they knew I was there. It was kind of a bit of a lazy dive from me, but I wasn't expecting them to brake quite so early. But anyway, this dropped me back a bit and allowed the Ford GT to overtake me into Spoon Corner at the end of that kind of higher speed section, which they'd got the run through. And then there was chaos into the final chicane, which allowed an R8 and the Porsche that had spun back through again. So I was losing places left, right and centre here. But then the R8 decided to turn into the cars next to them on the straight and take them both out, which also slowed the R8 itself down, allowing me alongside and able to dive into the first corner, putting me back into 3rd place again, where I was actually quite surprised how quickly I caught up to the Porsche in 2nd up ahead. That I should have got past pretty easily, but I couldn't find a way round them. They did do some slightly questionable defending on the final lap, particularly weaving a bit on the back straight and into 130R, and around the final chicane he definitely moved to the left and then to the right, so I didn't really in the end dare go for the dive up the inside, but I probably should have done it anyway. So yeah, kind of a shame I couldn't get past them because they were weaving a little bit. But anyway, all in all, it was a pretty good result, finishing 3rd in the first race here, and a super fun race in the rain, battling with those Porsches in particular. Secondly, we were racing at Homestead, Miami, and I went for the Audi R8 this time, also choosing not to qualify in this one to see how starting further back might go. I actually opted for hard tyres in the hope of not having to stop, but later realised that maybe wasn't necessary. But anyway, being further down the field resulted in witnessing Some less experienced drivers, shall we say. Firstly, the BMW in front was very slow off the line, so I had to kind of dodge around them a bit, and then they braked very early into the braking zone, and I kind of got stuck bumping into the back of them as the rest of the pack swamped past us all. I was then able to go around the outside of a slow Acura NSX that had gone for an excursion across the grass, and get to the inside of this Ford GT, then being able to send it on the BMW when they again braked early, as I was expecting them to, into the next corner, making the pass cleanly, I might add, because when they returned the favour into the next corner, they decided to push their way through rather on the inside, despite clearly being slower than me. So yeah, this BMW was starting to annoy me a little bit at this point. That is until a couple of corners later, an Acura came out of nowhere and punted them into absolute oblivion for some reason. As far as I can tell though, looking back through the footage, the BMW didn't at any point do anything to the Acura, so I'm not sure quite why they decided to do that. But anyway, it's a Forza online session, what do we expect? A Ferrari then decided a little while later to go and mow the lawn, giving me a place, and a bit after that I ended up behind this Corvette, who I quickly passed, but then into the next corner, gave me a punt and went up the inside, again a bit like the BMW had, but then they proceeded to squeeze me into a wall when I hung it round the outside onto the banking. So this was getting, again, pretty annoying. They then defended very illegally and started weaving on the straights, despite again clearly being slower than me. Eventually though, they did make a mistake braking too late, so I went to the inside to go past, but even here as they rejoined, they attempted to push me off the track to the inside. At this point I'd kind of had enough, so instead of letting this happen, I sort of pushed back a bit to stay on the track, and did manage to get past, finally leaving them trying to regain control down that straight behind. This put me up into 6th place though, where I remained until the end of the race. Not as good a result as last time, but given I didn't qualify at all, not too bad really. I did though, like I said, discover that those hard tyres weren't necessary. I would have in fact easily made it to the end on mediums and probably had a little bit more speed in those tyres, but I don't think it would have been enough to change my finishing position. Then it was off to Virginia International Raceway. This time I went for the Acura NSX. By the time I had loaded into this one and set my tyres and fuel up and made some notes on the previous race for this video, I only had time for one qualifying lap. And this is kind of the problem if you go straight from one race to the next. If you don't get into the next one immediately, you won't have time for your 3 qualifying laps, or even potentially at all if you spend a bit of time setting your fuel and tyres up. Anyway, there were only 6 people in this one, so I still ended up starting in 4th place. I didn't have a great start though, and lost out to a Corvette pretty quickly, putting me down into 5th place. I was then chasing a Dodge Viper for a bit until eventually they clipped the grass, giving me a chance to get past, I thought at least. But when I went for the gap, they kind of lost the back end and spun into me a bit. I think they were still trying to recover from that off. So yeah, a bit of a shame they took me clean off the track there, and I very narrowly avoided taking them out again when I rejoined. I kind of let it just roll across the grass there, so that I didn't get a penalty for going on power. This also allowed the 2 cars behind to get past me on the main straight, getting the run out of the final corner. But then they both decided to brake far too late into the first corner, going off onto the grass and putting me back in 4th again. So back where I was, chasing the Viper again. We then had a few off-track excursions and gained a few penalties, so I was trying to kind of keep up with them enough to more than counter their penalty and put me ahead in the final finishing order. But I then also had an off-track excursion myself, and upon rejoining found a BMW right up behind me, who I did begin to pull away from again, but there was no hope of catching the Viper anymore, until I clipped the grass on the exit of a corner trying to gain some more distance away from the BMW, and spun my car round, letting them back past, and then not being able to catch up again, remaining in 5th place until the end of the race. So not anywhere near as good as my first 2 races. The penultimate race of today's video took us to Laguna's Seca, and this time I went for the very American Dodge Challenger Trans Am, which by the way has no headlights, don't use it if it's a nighttime race. With this I managed to set a 126.3 in qualifying, which isn't great as it turns out, giving me an 8th place grid spot. I then had a very wheel spinny start, which wasn't all that surprising in this car, but it meant that a Porsche behind went for a move that was never going to happen into turn 1, thinking they were a lot faster than me, but basically they ended up bumping into the back of me, pushing me wide, and then decided that wasn't quite enough, so tried it again into the second half of that sort of first turny bit, this time taking me right off the track and demoting me to 14th place, where I was crashed into some more by some other vehicles for good measure. Cars were then going off left and right, as seems to be the way further down the field in these racing, allowing me to gain a few places back. Up the hill, I went to the middle of a Porsche and a Corvette, which perhaps wasn't the best idea, as a Ferrari was spinning up ahead as well, and somehow, with the help of the Corvette backing out of it, I survived that fast corner at the top of the hill, and found myself up in 9th place again. Eventually, myself and the green Porsche up ahead both caught the pink Porsche that had initially killed me on that first corner, the green Porsche getting past pretty quickly, leaving me to give the pink car a few friendly bumps to return the favour from earlier, but nothing too much. I didn't want to actually send him off the track, just wanted to remind him that he had sent me off. He then did very much the same move that he had done to me on the Viper in front of him, into turn 1, bumping them wide on the first part of the corner, which unsettled their car, and then pushing them even wider on the second half of the corner, out onto the gravel, and then overtaking. So to me it became clear at this point that that move definitely wasn't an accident the first time round. I did eventually also clear that Viper, and then found a Corvette approaching very fast from behind, who I started to defend from for a few corners, before eventually I backed out of the inside of the top of the hill, as I knew they were faster than me and it wasn't worth risking too much. We had already done well to go side by side through several corners, with this little race between us being absolutely brilliant. I did love it, despite just defending for a few corners, because we were wheel to wheel, millimetres apart, but with still no contact between us. So I have to say, this was probably the best driving that I saw during these races, just because we were able to have a battle so close without hitting each other, which I don't think I've seen in any race. There's usually at least some contact. So yeah, that was super fun, even though it only lasted for a few corners, and then the Corvette found themselves ahead of me, which is probably where they should have been. We then both chased down the Porsches ahead. I was managing to keep up with the Corvette somewhat after this, until the green Porsche gave up and went to build sandcastles at the end of the final lap, and then the lighting all glitched out and went weird between that incident and the final corner, which into the final corner the Corvette went very wide, giving me an incredible run on them down the final straight, but it was never going to be enough with that run to the line, leaving me just behind them in 7th and giving me a 7th place finish. And finally, last but not least, we went to Watkins Glen, and with the Ferrari being the only GT3 car that I owned that I hadn't used yet, I went for that, despite the livery very much not being finished, and definitely being a work in progress. Here I started very well from 8th place again, after a very average qualifying lap, having to dodge a slow BMW off the line, and having a huge amount more speed than all the other cars going down into the turn 1, which is one of the traits of the Ferrari. I actually went for medium tyres here, as the track was only slightly damp, although a lot of the other cars seemed to be going for wets. The Corvette ahead then braked dangerously early into turn 1, which to be fair, their gamer tag had warned me about. I then narrowly avoided a big accident between 3 cars into the first sort of chicaney bit up the hill. Very narrowly missed that, but then after gaining all of those places I promptly spun all by myself at the high-speed bus stop, just taking a little bit much speed over the curb and probably lifting off at the wrong time, just unsettled the Ferrari and sent it round. At this point though I thought maybe it was the tyres and I should have gone for the wets like a lot of other cars did, but then I saw how quickly I was catching up to the cars in front, which took me the rest of the race because they had got quite a gap by the time I'd spun and rejoined. But I only just managed to catch and pass the 2 cars ahead right at the end of the final lap, having to send it a little bit on both of them. But I think because they're on wets, they had that much less grip than me that with my mediums I could just go straight up the inside of both of them, ending up 4th, which after that spin at the start I was pretty happy with, especially as that's the second best result today, the best one since that first race at Suzuka, which was my only podium in this video. And those are all 5 of the races that we're going to be doing in today's video. After all of that, I'm still stuck at an A safety rating, which is slightly annoying given it only seems to increase very occasionally and not very easily, mostly because other people crash into you a lot even if you're very careful. And my skill rating has fallen slightly from 4,756 that we started at to 4,726, which I'm not actually terribly surprised by. I've not had the best results today, with my best being 3rd, and that being my only podium. Despite that though, I've had some great fun races in this video, and yeah, I've loved doing GT car racing in featured multiplayer, although I have to say I think I probably do slightly prefer touring cars. It's just that much closer and that much slower, I suppose. But anyway, that is going to be all for all 5 of the GT car featured multiplayer races in today's video. So thank you very much for watching, and I'll be back with the next one very soon.